Hello everyone, and welcome. Today, we are jumping back in to The Bridge of the Gods by F.H. Balch. We have finally made it to the point where all of our plot lines, or most of our plot lines, have come together. We are now in the area of Portland, Oregon, or what would become Portland, near Wappatto Island. We finally have the Indians from the east, as well as Reverend Cecil Gray in Oregon. And now we finally get to merge that with the plot of the Willamette, peoples of the Willamette. Chapter 4, An Indian Trail. Like flame within the naked hand, his body bore his burning heart. Dante Rossetti. Wappatto Island had seen many gatherings of the tribes, but never before had it seen so large an assembly as on the opening day of the council. The great cottonwoods of the council grove waved over an audience of sachems and warriors, the like of which the oldest living Indian could not remember. No weapons were to be seen, for Multnomah had commanded that all arms be left that day in the lodges. But the dissatisfied Indians had come with weapons hidden under their robes of deer or wolf skin, which no one should have known better than Multnomah. Had he taken any precautions against surprise? Evidently not. A large body of Willamette warriors, muffled in their blankets, lounged carelessly around the grove, with not a weapon visible among them. Behind them thronged the vast and motley assemblage of doubtful allies, and back of them, on the outskirts of the crowd, were the faithful cayuses, unarmed like the Willamettes. How Multnomah's wonderful astuteness failed him now when it was never needed more. He was on the council seat, a stone covered with furs. The Willamette sachems sat in their places facing him, and mats were spread for the chiefs of the tributaries. On a bear skin before the stern war chief lay a peace pipe and a tomahawk, and to the Indians accustomed to signs and symbols, the two had a grim significance. One by one, the chiefs entered the circle and took their seats on the mats provided for them. Those who were friendly to Multnomah first laid presents before him. Those who were not took their places without offering him either gift or salutation. Multnomah, however, seemed unconscious of any neglect. The chief of a Klamath tribe offered him a brilliantly dyed blanket. Another, a finely fringed quiver full of arrows. Another, a long and massive string of hiangua shells. Each laid his gift before Multnomah and took his seat in silence. The chief of the Chiponish presented him with a fine horse, the best belonging to his tribe. Multnomah accepted it, and a slave led it away. Then came Snoqualmie, bringing with him Cecil Gray. The chief's hour of vengeance was at hand. Behold, the white man from the land where the sun rises, the white shaman, of whom all the tribes have heard. He is thine. Let him be the white slave of Multnomah. All the chiefs have slaves, but who will have a white slave like Multnomah? Cecil saw the abyss of slavery yawning before him, and grew pale to the lips. His heart sank within him. Then the resolute purpose that had never failed him in time of peril returned. He lifted his head and met Multnomah's gaze with dignity. The war chief bent on him the glance which read men to the heart. The white stranger has been a chief among his own people, he said to Cecil, more in the manner of one asserting a fact than asking a question. I have often spoken to my people in the gatherings to hear the word of the Great Spirit. Again, the keen, inscrutable gaze of the great chief seemed to probe his being to his core. Again, the calm, grave stranger met it without shrinking. The instinct so common among savage races, of in some way knowing what a man is, of intuitively grasping his true merit, was possessed by Multnomah in a large degree, and the royalty in his nature instinctively recognized the royalty in Cecil's. The white guest who comes into the land of Multnomah shall be to him as a guest. The chief should still be chief in any land. White stranger, Multnomah gives you welcome. Sit down among the chiefs. Cecil took his place among them with all the composure he could command, well knowing that he who would be influential among the Indians must seem to be unmoved by any change of fortune. He felt, however, not only the joy of personal deliverance, but mingled with it came the glad, triumphant thought that he had now a voice in the deliberations of the chiefs. It was a grand door opened for Indian evangelization. As for Snoqualmie, his face was as impassive as granite. One would have said that Cecil's victory was to him a matter of no moment at all. But under the guise of indifference, his anger burned fierce and deadly, not against Multnomah, but against Cecil. The last chief had taken his place in the council. There was a long, ceremonious pause. Then Multnomah arose. He looked over the council, upon the stern faces of the Willamettes and the loyal tributaries, upon the sullen faces of the malcontents, upon the fierce and lowering multitude beyond. Over the throng he looked, and felt as one feels who stands on the brink of a volcano. Yet his strong voice never rang stronger. The grand old chief never looked more a chief than then. He is every inch a king, thought Cecil. The chief spoke in the common Willamette language, at that time the medium of intercourse between the tribes as the Chinook is now. The royal tongue was not used in a mixed council. Warriors and chiefs, Multnomah gives you welcome. He spreads the buffalo robe. He made the Indian gesture of welcome, opening his hands to them with a backward and downward gesture, as of one spreading a robe. To the warriors, Multnomah says, the grass upon my prairies is green for your horses. Behold the wood, the water, the game, they are yours. To the chiefs he says, the mat is spread for you in my own lodge, and the meat is cooked. The hearts of the Willamettes change not as the winters go by, and your welcome is the same as of old. Word came to us that the tribes were angry and had spoken bitter things against the Willamettes. Yes, that they longed for the Confederacy to be broken, and the old days to come again, when tribe was divided against tribe, and the Shoshones and Spokanes trampled upon you all. But Multnomah trusted his allies, for had they not smoked the peace pipe with him and gone with him on the war trail? So he stopped his ears and would not listen, but let those rumors go past him like thistledown upon the wind. Warriors, Multnomah has shown his heart. What say you? Shall the peace pipe be lighted and the talk begin? He resumed his seat. All eyes turned to where the peace pipe and the tomahawk lay side by side before the council. Multnomah seemed waiting for them to choose between the two. Then Snoqualmie, the bravest and most loyal of the tributaries, spoke. Let the peace pipe be lighted. We come not for strife, but to be knit together. The angry malcontents in the council only frowned and drew their blankets closer around them. Tahomish the seer, as the oldest chief and most renowned medicine man present, came forward and lighted the pipe, a long, thin piece of carving in black stone, the workmanship of the Nootkos or Haidas, who made the more elaborate pipes used by Indians on the Columbia River. Muttering some mystical incantation, he waved it to the east and the west, to the north and the south. And when the charm was complete, gave it to Multnomah, who smoked it and passed it to Snoqualmie. From chief to chief it circled around the whole council, but among them were those who sat with eyes fixed moodily on the ground, and would not so much as touch or look at it. As the pipe passed round, there was a subdued murmur and movement in the multitude, a low threatening clamor, as yet held in check by awe of Multnomah and dread of the Willamette warriors. But the war chief seemed unconscious that any had refused the pipe. He now arose and said, "The pipe is smoked. Are not our hearts as one? Is there not perfect trust between us? Now let us talk. First of all, Multnomah desires wise words from his brethren. Last winter, one of the tribes rose up against Multnomah, saying that he should no longer be elder brother and war chief of the tribes. But the rebels were beaten, and all of them slain, save the chief, who was reserved to be tried before you. You, in your wisdom, shall decide what shall be done with the warrior who has rebelled against his chief and stained his hands with the blood of his brethren." 2 Willamette braves then entered the circle, bringing with them one whose hands were tied behind him, whose form was emaciated with hunger and disease, but whose carriage was erect and haughty. Behind came a squaw, following him into the very presence of Multnomah, as if resolved to share his fortunes to the last. It was his wife. She was instantly thrust back and driven with brutal blows from the council. But she lingered on the outskirts of the crowd, watching and waiting with mute, sullen fidelity the outcome of the trial. No one looked at her. No one cared for her. Even her husband's sympathizers jostled the poor shrinking form aside, for she was only a squaw, while he was a great brave. He looked a great brave, standing there before Multnomah and the chiefs with a dignity in his mien that no reverse could crush no torture could destroy. Haggard, starved, bound, his eyes gleamed deathless and unconquerable hate on council and war chief alike. There were dark and menacing looks among the malcontents. In the captive they saw personified their own loss of freedom and the hated domination of the Willamettes. Speak, you that were a chief, you whose people sleep in the dust. What have you to say in your defense? The tribes are met together, and the chiefs sit here to listen and to judge. The rebel sachem drew himself up proudly and fixed his flashing eyes on Multnomah. The tongue of Multnomah is a trap. I am brought not to be tried, but to be condemned and slain, that the tribes may see it and be afraid. No one knows this better than Multnomah, yet I will speak while I still live and stand here in the sun. For I go out into the darkness, and the earth will cover my face, and my voice shall be heard no more among men. Why should the Willamettes rule the other tribes? Are they better than we? The Great Spirit gave us freedom, and who may make himself master and take it away? I was chief of a tribe. We dwelt in the land the Great Spirit gave our fathers. Their bones were in it, it was ours. But the Willamettes said to us, we are your elder brethren. You must help us. Come, go with us to fight the Shoshones. Our young men went, for the Willamettes were strong, and we could not refuse them. Many were slain, and the women wailed despairingly. The Willamettes hunted on our hunting grounds and dug the camas on our prairies, so that there was not enough for us. And when winter came, our children cried for food. Then the runners of the Willamettes came to us through the snow, saying, come and join the war party that goes to fight the Bannocks. But our hearts burned within us, and we replied, our hunting grounds and our food you have taken. Will you have our lives also? Go back and tell your chief that if we must fight, we will fight him and not the Bannocks. Then the Willamettes came upon us, and we fought them, for their tyranny was so heavy that we could not breathe under it, and death had become better than life. But they were the stronger, and when did the heart of a Willamette feel pity? Today I only am left to say these words for my race. Who made the Willamettes masters over us? The Great Spirit gave us freedom, and none may take it away. Was it not well to fight? Yes, free my hands and give me back my people from the cairns and the death huts, and we will fight again. I go to my death, but the words I have spoken will live. The hearts of those listening here will treasure them up. They will be told around the lodge fires and repeated in the war dance. The words I speak will go out among the tribes, and no man can destroy them. Yes, they go outwards, but they will come back arrows and war in the day of vengeance, when the tribes shall rise against the oppressor. I have spoken. My words are done. He stood erect and motionless. The wrath and disdain passed from his features, and stoicism settled over them like a mask of stone. Multnomah's cold regard had not faltered a moment under the chief's invective. No denunciation could shake that iron self-control. The rebellious chiefs interchanged meaning glances. The throng of malcontents outside the grove pressed closer
upon the ring of Willamette warriors, who were still standing or squatting idly around it. More than one weapon could be seen among them, in defiance of the war chief's prohibition. And the presage of a terrible storm darkened on those grim, wild faces. The more peaceably disposed bands began to draw themselves apart. An ominous silence crept through the crowd as they felt the crisis approaching. But Multnomah saw nothing, and the circle of Willamette warriors were stolidly indifferent. Can they not see that the tribes are on the verge of revolt? Thought Cecil, anxiously, fearing a bloody massacre. You have heard the words of the rebel. What have you to say? Let the white man speak first, as he was the last to join us. Cecil rose and pictured in the common Willamette tongue, with which he had familiarized himself during his long stay with the Cayuses, the terrible results of disunion, the desolating consequences of war, tribe clashing against tribe, and their common enemies trampling on them all. Even those who were on the verge of insurrection listened reverently to the white wizard, who had drawn wisdom from the Great Spirit. But it did not shake their purpose. Their own dreamers had talked with the Great Spirit too, in trance and vision, and had promised them victory over the Willamettes. Dahomey followed, and Cecil, who had known some of the finest orators in Europe, listened in amazement to a voice the most musical he had ever heard. He looked in wonder on the repulsive features that seemed so much at variance with those melodious intonations. Dahomey pleaded for union and for the death of the rebel. It seemed for a moment as if his soft, persuasive accents would win the day. But it was only for a moment. The spell was broken the instant he ceased. Then Snoqualmie spoke. One by one, the great sachems of the Willamettes gave their voices for death. Many of the friendly allies did not give their decision at all, but said to Multnomah, "You speak for us. Your word shall be our word." When the dissatisfied chiefs were asked for their counsel, the sullen reply was given, "I have no tongue today," or "I do not know." Multnomah seemed not to notice their answers. Only those who knew him best saw a gleam kindling in his eyes that told of a terrible vengeance drawing near. The captive waited passively, seeking neither to see nor hear. At length, all had spoken or had an opportunity to speak, and Multnomah rose to give the final decision. Beyond the circle of Willamettes, who were still indifferent and unconcerned, the discontented bands had thrown aside all concealment and stood with bared weapons in their hands. All murmurs had ceased. There was a death-like silence in the dense mob, which seemed gathering itself together for a forward rush, the commencement of a fearful massacre. Behind it were the friendly Cayuses, but not a weapon could be seen among them. The chief saw all, saw too that his enemies only waited for him to pronounce sentence upon the captive, that was the preconcerted signal for attack. Now among some of the tribes, sentence was pronounced not by word, but by gesture. There was the gesture for acquittal, the gesture for condemnation. Multnomah lifted his right hand. There was breathless suspense. What would it be? Fixing his eyes on the armed malcontents who were waiting to spring, He clenched his hand and made a downward gesture, as if striking a blow. It was the death signal, the death sentence. In an instant, a deafening shout rang through the grove, and the bloodthirsty mob surged forward to the massacre. Then, so suddenly that it blended with and seemed a part of the same shout, the dreaded Willamette war cry shook the earth. Quick as thought, the Willamettes who had been lounging so idly around the grove were on their feet, their blankets thrown aside, the weapons that had been concealed under them ready in their hands. A wall of indomitable warriors had leaped up around the grove. At the same moment, the cayuses in the rear bared their weapons and shouted back the Willamette war cry. The rebels were staggered. The trap was sprung on them before they knew that there was a trap. Those in front shrank back from the iron warriors of Loma. Those in the rear wavered before the fierce cayuses. They paused, a swaying flood of humanity caught between two lines of rock. And on that cliffhanger, we end today's chapter. Next week, we will finish book 3 with a much shorter chapter. And after that, we'll be taking a little break from the book to focus on some more other ideas that you've hopefully been seeing on the channel. As always, thank you all for watching and listening, and have a wonderful rest of your evening.